Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my March wrap-up. Alright guys, so I think it is safe to say my reading slump is officially over. I read 13 books in March, and they were wildly different. So I started with a young adult dystopian that completely shattered me. I also read a 6-star dark academia book that I also cannot stop thinking about, then a bunch of fantasy romance and romantasy, and then some really, really dark romance. So I had 2 6-star reads, like some of my favorite books of the year, and then more than half the books I read this month were 4 stars or above. So this has been one of the best reading months of my life, and I am so excited to talk about these books with you guys. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about all the books I read in March. So starting off with Sunrise on the Reaping. This is the 5th book in the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. Now, I'm going to split my review into 2 sections, so I will have a spoiler-free review and then a spoiler-filled review, but I will have a spoiler warning on the screen, and also I have timestamps down below if you just want to skip the spoiler-filled section. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Hunger Games, it is a YA dystopian series. I read it in college, and admittedly, I liked it, but I wasn't the biggest fan. And I was excited for this, but it wasn't like at the top of my TBR. This is one of the best books I have read all year. It is one of these 6 stars in my March wrap-up. I loved this book, and this book emotionally destroyed me. So if you're unfamiliar with the Hunger Games in general, we are following Haymitch Abernathy, and he is living in District 12, and he ends up being selected to participate in the Second Quarter Quell, which is the 50th anniversary of the Hunger Games. Now, I am sure many of you are very familiar with what the Hunger Games actually is. It's essentially a fight to the death that is put on by a very evil government body, and it's very, very upsetting. So I loved this story. Like many people have said, this just felt like a missing piece to the entire Hunger Games world. It made me appreciate all of the other books so much more, specifically Catching Fire, and I just thought this was a beautiful, beautiful story. So if you have not read this, please do yourself a favor, pick it up. I can't even put into words how much I loved this book, but also was slightly emotionally traumatized by this book. All right, so getting into spoilers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, spoiler filled. Okay, so once again, absolutely emotionally just destroyed by this. I always loved Haymitch, especially how Woody Harrelson portrayed him in the movies. Loved him there. So I knew I was going to enjoy his story, but just seeing how he went from the character that is introduced in this book to where he is or starts out in the Hunger Games is so upsetting. He doesn't even drink at the start of this. I think he says he doesn't like the taste of alcohol. And oh my gosh, just the pain this guy went through. I've seen a lot of TikToks that were essentially saying that Suzanne Collins was just so over all of the thirst traps from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes of Snow that she was like, I'm really gonna put Haymitch through it. But just this book in general, I feel like fleshed out so many of the side characters, and there's been a lot of critiques that it almost felt like fan service to introduce characters that we already love from this series, but I don't think so. I think really it was so masterfully done. It just made me fall in love with these characters even more and made them even more complex, like Beatty having a son that ends up dying in the games, and Wyrus actually having to mentor someone, and Beatty was her mentor just the year previous, so that was such a conflict of interest. And then you're introduced to Maisie Donner, who, if you did look into the lore of the Hunger Games, you already thought you knew so much about her. And all of that turned out to be false, and I love how this book really shows false narrative and how things can be manipulated, and I just absolutely cannot talk about how much I love this book enough. This is such a hard read, but also a brilliant read. And the ending, that poem, oh my gosh, and so many theories. I love this. So once again, if you can't tell, one of my favorite books I've read this year, and I just cannot wait to re-binge all of the movies. I've already re-binged them twice, and I already want to do a third binge. And honestly, while I want Finnick's story, I am not sure I am ready for it, so we will see. I'll appreciate it, and I will read it if it's written, but if it's not written, I understand why. And March was the start of the Lady of Darkness read-along that is taking place over on my Patreon. So I read the first book along with my patrons, and I gave this 4 stars. Now, this was a reread for me, and I will say the main character frustrated me just a little bit more on this reread. I also forgot she was 19. So I was going to say I forgot. She's a little bit chaotic and makes some very poor choices. But during the live show I had with my patrons when we were discussing this book, I realized I kept picturing her as like a 20-something, and she's actually a teenager. So it makes a lot more sense. But anyway, this is a dark fantasy romance series, and we are following Scarlet. And when Scarlet was very young, she was adopted by the Assassin Lord, and he also adopted 2 other girls and trained them to be insanely good killers. So they are known as these 3 very feared assassins, and all Scarlet wants is to get revenge on the Fire Prince that she believes has killed her mother, and the Assassin Lord is holding this information over her head. So she is given the opportunity that if she kills this one specific person, the Assassin Lord will finally give her this information, but her plans to kill this guy kind of get derailed when children start going missing. Now, this series has a little bit of everything. I mean, we have vampires, witches, fae, so much magic. I'm obsessed with the magic system so far, and the side characters are so well done. I love the Legacy series by the same author that is set in the same world, so I already knew I was going to love the writing and the characters, and this has not been a disappointment so far. So I am very excited about book 2, and if you're not part of our read-along, I hope you join us. And next up is my Patreon Fantasy Romance Book Club pick for March. My patrons chose The Goddess of. Now, this is a dark kind of mix between urban and high fantasy. The story is following Naya, and she is the very unloved daughter of a high sea goddess. Now, this goddess has had a curse placed upon her, and in order to break the curse, she is going to force her daughter, Naya, to marry someone that she does not love. Now, Naya is treated horribly by her entire family. They are both physically, verbally, mentally abusive. This is a very tough read. It's also dual timelines, so we're kind of watching Naya have to grow up in this horrible environment in her childhood, and then the other timeline is the present. So Naya, in order to escape this arranged marriage, ends up making a bargain with the god of curses that she will owe him some sort of repayment if he is able to get her out of this realm, and he agrees. So it's Naya trying to survive in the mortal realm and flee her family and the gods, and there's also a romance sprinkled in somewhere. But overall, this book was much darker than I was anticipating. It also was heavier, I feel like. The emotional, just the family structure in this was so hard to read, watching these people just fail this young girl, and it hurt reading this. This also has animal death, just let that be known. I didn't see the trigger warning when I was checking, but I very well could have missed it, so know that going in. There is also an animal companion in this that does survive and is one of my absolute favorites. When you read it, you will see it's actually on this cover if you look very closely. This is also one of the most beautiful covers of any book I own, including special editions. So I will say I gave this, I believe, 3.75, 4 stars, but I do plan on reading the second book in this series, Even in Death. It's going to follow a separate couple that is introduced at the end of this book, and I have a feeling I am going to absolutely love that couple. And next up, we have Helfyre. Now, this is a dark fantasy romance, and I had this book on so many TBRs. I think I've actually had this physical copy for over 2 years at this point, and I was desperately waiting for the audiobook to drop. Finally realized that it released. I binged this in a day, and it was a bit of a disappointment. So I ended up giving this 2 stars, and on paper, this seems like a book I would absolutely love. I think it's inspired by Hades and Persephone. We're following this immortal being, and there's like a light side and a dark side, and she, after the death of her mother, she wants to escape her family that is treating her very cruelly. She's part of like the light immortals, and she goes to the underworld trying to find freedom. She runs into the devil of the underworld, and I think his name's Arok. And he offers her a deal. If she will give up her soul to him, he will let her stay in the underworld and offer her his protection. And if something is to happen to her under his care, then he will have to return her soul and she'll go back. So it's their romance, and right away, there's like instant attraction between them. I honestly just didn't really feel connected to this story. I had so much trouble visualizing this world, and there were very odd transitions to where I really didn't know what was going on. So I had a lot of trouble just following this story in general. And there were some parts that were described very beautifully. I just feel like the pacing didn't work for me. It was very, very slow in some parts, and some parts I really needed more information to fully understand. And I didn't love the romance. I didn't love either character, so I really didn't care if they were together or not. So unfortunately, I will not be continuing with this series, but this does have fairly good reviews on Goodreads. So if you're looking for a dark fantasy romance, kind of Hades and Persephone retelling, maybe give this a try. You might enjoy it more than me. All right, this next book is so hard for me to give a star rating. So it is The Dagger and the Forbidden Heir. This is the perfect fantasy romance book if you are just looking for a light and fun read. I will say the writing, not my favorite, especially the banter. This is a fantasy romance, but it uses a lot of modern day phrases, and sometimes that works for me. For this, I actually thought it was enjoyable. It added to like just the fun kind of Pirates of the Caribbean vibe of this story, but I can see how this will not be for everyone. But if you're unfamiliar with this story, we are following this kind of war that's happening. So we're following the King of the Fae, and he is in an arranged marriage to the Queen of the Fae. However, it's really a loveless match, and he ends up having a bastard daughter that he wants to name Heir. Well, when he tells his wife this, she is none too happy, and something ends up going wrong, and the daughter is now orphaned. So the queen says, hey, you can keep your bastard child. However, I want to have a war with the humans, and that's the only way I'm going to be okay with this. He agrees. So now there's just been a war between the Fae and the humans for hundreds of years. So we are now following the bastard daughter, who is the head of an army working for her father, who is the king, but no one knows that she is actually the daughter. And it's kind of her journey trying to end this war. And then we're also simultaneously following a rebel human who is also trying to stop the Fae and stop this war from going on. And then we're also in the POV of the villain, which I kind of enjoyed. At some points, he felt very like mustache twirling villain when you were in his head. I will say whoever narrated him did such a good job. I was obsessed with his voice, but he was written in such a way that he seemed like a very classic like Disney Gaston type villain. But overall, it was fun. So I will probably pick up the rest of the series over the summer because it does have, like I said, kind of a Pirates of the Caribbean vibe going on. And overall, just a good time. And next up, I read The Scattered Bones. This is a dark fantasy romance standalone. And this was a 5-star read, one of my top reads of the year. And it is a book that while I loved it and will never be able to stop thinking about it, I probably will never read it again. I had another friend say something similar. This book is somewhat traumatic, so definitely check trigger warnings. It is a pretty heavy book emotionally and just also gory. I didn't exactly really express how gory some of the chapters in this book are, so definitely check trigger warnings. I've had a few people say they weren't expecting a certain scene that, yeah, it's kind of dark. So definitely check trigger warnings, but oh my gosh, this book. So if you're unfamiliar with the plot, we are following Sela, and after the death of her greatest love, Cade, she is met by a mysterious stranger who tells Sela that if she is able to find the body parts of her love that have been scattered across the realm, he will be able to bring Cade back to life. So this mission is so unbelievably dangerous because not only are these body parts scattered across the realm, they are actually being guarded by these trials that are set by these vengeful gods that Sela has to essentially conquer. And this is a dual timeline. We are watching Sela slowly fall in love with Cade, and the other timeline is watching Sela do absolutely everything in her power to be able to bring her greatest love back. And it is such a beautiful and moving story. And I would read so many books set in this world and with these characters. I'm so excited to read more from this author. And next up, we have Blood Over Brighthaven. Now, this is a dark academia fantasy standalone. So this is set in the city of Tehran, where magic fuels progress, but at a very steep cost. In the story, we are following Siona, and she ends up being accepted to become one of the first women mages. Now, she is treated absolutely terribly by her fellow mages because they look down on her for being a woman, and she has to overcome a lot of adversity, including her not being granted an assistant. Instead, she is granted a janitor. Now, this janitor is Tumul, and he happens to be from a lower deemed class of people known as the Quen, and all of the Quen are first forced into a servitude type position, and they are also looked down upon. And we are watching these two people, both Siona and Tumul, try to overcome all of these obstacles and prove to the university that they should be there. And it is so much more than just that plot, but I feel like this is something that you should really go into somewhat blind, but the message in this is just so powerful. And I will say the ending does leave a lot to be desired, but I feel like that almost amplifies the message and the power of this story. And it's just so heartbreaking, and also just so absolutely, I loved this book, guys. So if you can't tell, I just really enjoyed it. And I think it's a very powerful read that shows a lot and has a lot of similarities to current day, and highly recommend if you like dark academia. There is little to no romance in this. Know that also going in. So know that. But if you like dark academia and you enjoyed The Sword of Cayenne, this has a very similar feel, just in a different setting, and just as powerful of a message and just as amazing characters. So highly recommend. And moving into dark romance, I read 2 books by Rina Kent. So first was God of War, which is the 6th book in the Legacy of the Gods series. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that series, I'm completely obsessed. I actually have a full kind of series review that I'll leave in the cards and in the description. It's part of my February wrap-up. I just gush about that series. But in that series, we are following 2 rival colleges and students from those colleges that end up entering into romances. And they are so good, so dark, amazing. But all of those books follow the same timeline. So we're just following different characters, but still kind of doing the same events. This one actually takes place in the future, the last book in the series. So all of the characters are a little bit older, and I'm happy we kind of get to see how they've progressed since book 5, which is my favorite in the series. But Eli and Ava, I didn't love their romance. I just really didn't feel as connected to their romance as some of the other ones. And Eli was not my favorite guy, but it was enjoyable. I still binged this book and read it in like a day and a half. So overall, still solid. I think I ended up rating it 4 stars. And next up, I read Kiss the Villain. This is Rina Kent's most recent release. Now, I was so excited when I heard this book was announced because, like I just said previously in the last clip, I completely binged the entire Legacy of the Gods series. So this is a spin-off book that is following a couple that was teased in the Legacy of Gods, and I believe there's going to be one more book, at least following another one of those couples. But this is a very dark student-teacher forbidden romance. It also features an MM romance, so it's Gareth, who's one of the students from the Legacy of Gods series, and then his professor, Caden. And like I said, the darkest book I've read by Rina Kent, and probably one of the darkest books I've read just in general. I will say this is much darker than the Legacy of Gods series, and I didn't think you could get much darker than God of Malice, but she achieved it in this book. That being said, I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding this, and I really don't even want to touch on that. I did enjoy this. I ended up rating this 4 stars. There were some parts that I did feel a little bit uncomfortable reading. I did know it was a dark romance going in, and I really liked Gareth as a character, and I wanted to see what his romance with Carson was going to develop into. So overall, I gave this 4 stars. It's not one of my favorites overall in the Legacy series. I know it's not actually part of the series. And honestly, they're not one of my favorite couples. I would probably rank them pretty low. But this still felt like it kind of fit within the entire world. And I am very, very, very much looking forward to the next couple we are going to follow. Oh my gosh, I am so excited. So I will say I'm excited for her next release. And let me know if you read this. What did you think? And next up, I read Little Sunshine by Layla Frost. This is the second book in the Black Resort series, the first book being Little Dove. And up until this book, that was my favorite age gap mafia romance, but I actually might have preferred this one just a little bit more. So this is following the enforcer that we meet in book 1, and also this girl named Mila. So Mila has been treated horribly by her mother and has been trying to live on her own. So she's 20 years old, and we find out that she's working at this dead-end job, and her mother has caused her to be fired. So she goes to this very fancy resort in Vegas trying to pickpocket money, and she is seen by Ash, who is working security. He's also the enforcer for the Mafia, and he ends up confronting her, and she runs away only to later be attacked and then wanders back into this resort seeking just safety. And it's their romance, and all he wants to do is take care of her and become her daddy. And it's her slowly just realizing that is also what she wants. And I love this. I read this entire book in a day while I was cleaning. I couldn't stop reading. So highly, highly recommend. And next up, I finally read Garron Park. Now, McKay from Oh Hey It's McKay has been talking about this book for so long, and I was desperate to read it, but there was no audiobook. And one dropped at the beginning of March. So I immediately downloaded it, and I binged it all in one day, the day it released, and it was worth all of the hype. I loved their romance. So in the story, we are following Devin, and he has an abusive father. So he really only has his older brother to depend on. And one day his father ends up attacking him for losing a motocross race. And he gets very, very gravely injured. So he's searching for help, and he ends up going to his rival Maddox's help, looking for his brother. Well, Maddox does not turn him away. Instead, he lets him come into his home, and he ends up taking care of him and lets him sleep there. And then a romance begins to blossom between these two guys that absolutely despised each other and were like the bitterest of rivals. And we get to watch their just animosity and hatred slowly turn into attraction, but they also both help heal each other and try to get each other out of these really difficult circumstances that they're in. And it's just a beautiful romance, and I cannot wait for book 2 to finally release via audio. And next up, I read Beautiful Beasts by Neva Altaj. This is the first book in her spin-off series from the Perfectly Imperfect series. So we are following the children of the couples that are introduced in Perfectly Imperfect. So this is actually a Beauty and the Beast reimagining. Unfortunately, this is probably the lowest I've rated one of her books. I ended up giving this between 3 and 3.5 stars. I felt like this dragged a little bit, and I didn't love the characters. So we were following Raphael, who ends up saving a very young girl from an explosion that he set up. But because of this, he becomes horribly scarred and disfigured. And he has very low self-worth, and he feels like he needs to pay people in order to feel loved by them. So we're following Raphael, and then we're also following this Elisa. I'm going to butcher her name, and she is the daughter of someone very high up in the Mafia that we were introduced to in the first book, Imperfectly Imperfect. Anyway, she is a hacker, and she's sick of guys looking at her only for her beauty instead of her hacking abilities. Well, Raphael ends up having his company hacked by her and immediately wants to kill the person that did that. So he sends people to kill her and bring her to him. And when he realizes it's a woman, and she's a very attractive woman at that, he becomes very interested in her, and that's really where our Beauty and the Beast plotline begins, and then it goes from there. It's their romance. So once again, I just didn't love them as characters, but I did love the nods to Beauty and the Beast, and I still enjoyed the story. So I am very much looking forward to the next book in this series. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in March. Please let me know down in the comments below what was your absolute favorite read of last month. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Kat, Kylie, Leslie, Lada, Amanda, Jess, and the San Andrea family. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.